Welcome to the Joe Cohen Show. Join me as I share my experience with biohacking and invite top health experts to explore the latest technology, supplements, research, and resources for optimizing your body and brain. Hey everyone, I'm very excited to have Chris Mirabile on the podcast. He's the founder and CEO of Novos. He's a longevity enthusiast and he's reduced his pace of aging by 31%. And reduced his biological age by 13.6 years using his products. And I brought him on here to talk about how to live longer, how to live healthier, and how to feel better. He had a brain tumor when he was 16, and that's what got him into health. So a similar journey to a lot of people in the space who had some kind of health issue, and then they took their health into their own hands. And now he's pioneering the anti-aging, longevity, and health span space. We obviously have a lot in common, and I'd like to know what he does to decelerate his aging, what works for him, what he thinks has the best evidence, and maybe ask some questions and get some interesting insights. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Joe. It's great to be here.
Pleasure. All right. So let's get started with you've got some anti-aging products, supplements, and you also have some apps. Let's start with I'm a supplement aficionado, we could say. And I'd like to know, what do you do? What are some of your top things for? So let's go through the ingredients and then with each ingredient, let's go through what are the mechanisms against aging that it helps with.
Sure. So I think it's probably easiest to talk about the formulations that my company Novos has created because it's all about us simplifying people's routines and putting them all in a single formulation or multiple formulations technically. But then there are other supplements that I take on top of that, which we can also talk about. But some of those
Okay.
other supplements are more for general health as opposed to for longevity specifically. So in our
Mhm.
flagship product, Novos Core, this is the first formula ever created in the world to address all 12 of the mechanisms of aging simultaneously. We filed for patents on this formula, as well as simpler versions of this formula. One of the ingredients is fisetin, and fisetin specifically can combat cellular senescence, altered intracellular communication, and loss of proteostasis. Another ingredient, which I know you're a fan of
What?
because we were
Yeah.
just,
1 second.
yep.
Let's go through one ingredient at a time. And
Okay.
I know I actually, now that I realize I'm going to have a lot of questions on each ingredient.
Okay.
So let's say I'm actually looking at the ingredients on the website and Vicin is number one here. We could go through that list and I could follow along as well. I guess I don't. Okay. So I've seen a lot of people taking Vicin. I don't take it personally. And I want you to convince me why I should take it. But the reason I don't take it is because I don't know there's two reasons. Number one is I don't feel any difference on it. So my framework is I either have to feel a difference or it has to, I have to see it change biomarkers in reality, like a significant biomarker that I say, okay, I didn't take it. Now I take it. And this is the biomarker change. Usually there will be clinical trials, but sometimes I'll take something and I'll realize, hey, since I started taking that, this happened. I stopped taking it. This went back to normal. And then I start to realize, hey, this changes the biomarker. Usually there's clinical trials and I use self-decode. Self-decode is what helps me figure out what to take based on my biomarkers and my genetics. But my issue with fisetin, and by the way, I'm a big fan of all your ingredient, like most of the ingredients here, almost all of them I take. Fisetin is one of the few that I don't. And
Okay.
so, like I said, in my framework, I don't notice a difference. It doesn't move biomarkers that I can tell. And this is where I want you to maybe push back if you know of biomarkers it does. And then in animal studies, it didn't extend lifespan.
Okay. Fair points. Do you take anything in the family of substances like quercetin, for example, or you don't take
No,
anything related?
it,
Okay.
it I would say quercetin and fisetin fall in the same category. Don't feel anything
They
from
do.
it. And no animal studies, either animal studies show negative effects or no positive effects on longevity. And I don't know what biomarkers it would move that it would make sense for me to take it.
Okay. Okay. So let's start. Fisetin is a flavonoid. It's what gives fruits and vegetables their bright colors. When we were creating the formulation, we were determining whether we wanted to use fisetin or quercetin specifically. One of our scientific advisors that we have on our team is Dr. Pamela Maher at the Salk Institute. And she does in vitro studies as well as in vivo human studies as well. What she's particularly interested in is cognitive decline and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And she's studied multiple different molecules, many different flavonoids, including fisetin and quercetin, as well as prescription drugs, including R&D prescription drugs that are not even on the market just yet. And when we're consulting with her before we put together the formulation, first, we determined that fisetin would probably be the best for us to go with relative to quercetin. Number one, because there are studies that show that it has a greater impact on senescent cells than quercetin does. Also, because there was some reason to believe that there's a possibility that quercetin might actually have an unfavorable effect on healthy cells. So not only would it impact senescent cells, but potentially impact healthy cells. And that's exactly the opposite of what you want from a senolytic or senomorphic molecule. Specifically, it's found in strawberries and apples. It does extend lifespan in various organisms. Specifically to the mouse study is probably what you're referring to. There was a mouse study that did not find an extension of lifespan, but other organism studies have. And simply because a single study doesn't find a lifespan extension does not mean that it was a perfectly conducted study or that it wouldn't in other studies find favorable effects. So we can't rule it out simply because of that, though it does warrant pause and consideration for why that might be the case. Now, fisetin has been shown to be able to have favorable cognitive effects, especially for people that have declining cognition. And Dr. Maher has noticed this in her own research. So cognition and memory are possibly favorably impacted by fisetin.
Is that in
It's
clinical
also,
trials?
I don't know off the top of my head if it's a published clinical trial, but I do know that within her lab that she has firsthand experience with people who have noticed benefits from fisetin.
Okay.
Now, it also specific pathways that are associated with aging, like mTOR, which can accelerate aging. It's one of the reasons why fasting or rapamycin can have favorable effects on longevity. Fisetin does inhibit the mTOR pathway. It's not going to be as aggressive as rapamycin, which is a very aggressive mTOR inhibiting drug, but it does still have a favorable impact on mTOR complex 1. Fisetin also has favorable effects on skin health. For example, it reduces the production of metalloproteinases, which are enzymes that can break down collagen and elastin. So it can potentially have a favorable effect on skin health, which for better or worse, when it comes to longevity and anti-aging, people do care about the aesthetic sides of aging as well. And there are other ingredients in Novos that can confront that side of aging also. Another thing worth mentioning is that Dr. Maher at Salk ran a study for us and compared individual ingredients in our formula, as well as our combined formula, to a prescription drug that is in the R&D stage right now, specifically focused on this process called oxytocin ferroptosis. And oxytocin ferroptosis can lead to Alzheimer's, dementia, certain forms of cancer, and I believe even metabolic disorders like type 2 diabetes. And it was found that relative to this prescription drug designed specifically to go up against oxytocin ferroptosis, fisetin was the single strongest ingredient to reduce that process of oxytocin ferroptosis out of all of our ingredients. And then our combined formula was actually halfway in between the effectiveness of fisetin and that prescription drug. So it was more than 50% as effective as that prescription drug. So that owes itself to the synergistic nature of our combined formulation and the ingredients in them, as well as the positive effect that fisetin can have on this neurocognitive and potentially carcinogenic process that happens in the body. Now, with full transparency, this was an in vitro study. It wasn't done in vivo, so you can take it with a grain of salt. But we do see reductions in inflammation as well from fisetin in vivo and in animal species and so on. And then one other thing, comparing Novos Core as a combined formula to the prescription drug rapamycin, which I mentioned, we did a study at Newcastle University in the United Kingdom where we looked at senescent cells and compared ourselves to rapamycin, and we were able to reduce the senescent cells by more than 50%, which was the same order of magnitude as rapamycin. And if you consider the ingredients in our lineup of Novos Core, fisetin is the most well known to have xenomorphic properties, if not senolytic properties. So it's most likely owed predominantly to fisetin, though it could have been the combination that led to that effect, which was on the same order of magnitude as rapamycin. So
Okay.
that's my attempt at convincing you that
Okay.
fisetin
So
has potential.
what what I would say, that just to understand the bigger picture for somebody who wants to understand it, I would say that you're looking at biological mechanisms more than clinical trials or specific labs that it's altering. Yeah, and you're looking at those mechanisms often in animals rather than humans, which, by the way, I'm not saying is a bad way of doing it. I'm just being clear. That's in this particular case. In other cases in the formula, you're probably doing other things. I see that some things that are in humans and whatnot. But in that specific case, it looks like you're looking at the biological mechanisms and you're trying to get at each biological mechanism of aging.
Correct. But I think it's important for me to give some context on this. So we are doing in vivo studies and we're doing human studies as well, both case studies and clinical trials with humans, double blind randomized placebo controlled studies. When it comes to the rationale for inclusion of ingredients, we first and foremost, we actually have this published on our website, public access. If you go to novoslabs.com and you go to the science menu and select approach, this is where we talk about it. So the first filter we put ingredients through was to make sure that each ingredient has positive impact on at least one, but ideally multiple of the mechanisms of aging, because our hypothesis was by addressing aging from a mechanistic point of view, we will have a positive effect on the phenotype of the living organism, namely humans. And this was reinforced by our scientific advisory board, people like Dr. George Church at Harvard and MIT Medical School, at Matt Caberline, who's the expert on rapamycin and other longevity interventions at University of Washington, and so on. We have them listed on our website. So after consulting with them, there was unanimous agreement that to make a positive impact on the aging process, it's a very good place to start by looking at it mechanistically. So that's the first criteria. The second criteria is that we wanted the ingredients to have a favorable impact on on lifespans of multiple animal models, which would then hint at conserved evolutionary pathways. In other words, if we extended the lifespan of killifish, but not C. elegans and not mice, then it's probably something unique to killifish that we're interacting with, that we're impacting. If we increase the lifespan of C. elegans, killifish, and mice, then there's a higher chance that whatever mechanisms or biopathways we're impacting, they're also conserved in human evolution as well, that it's something fundamental to life. And there's a higher chance that this is going to have a favorable effect on humans as well, but it's not a guarantee. But this is the progression, right? So then the next criteria is that they are associated with reduced risk of different aging related processes or outcomes in human studies and in animal studies, indicating that they act on the underlying process of aging. So we can't study in humans. We don't have enough time and money and resources. How are we extending lifespan and health span in humans over? It would take decades and tens of millions of dollars, as we already know from the TAME study with metformin. What can we do? We can now look at humans and see, when humans take these ingredients in clinical trials, are we seeing that they have better health outcomes, whether it be specific biomarkers or just overall subjective improvements and so on. So that's the next
And that's
criteria.
the clinical study that you're doing with all these ingredients. So it's not one at a
So,
time.
so we do it with all of the ingredients, but what I'm describing now is the criteria
How
we
they get in the
applied for
formula.
creating the formula in the first place, the logic we
Got it.
applied. Looking forward to future formulations and products that are in our R&D pipeline, we are actually making new discoveries of our own for different ingredients that you and I have, never heard of, if not for me working on this project.
Let me know. Tell
But
me. Give me an
it's top
example.
secret right now.
Oh, it's top
But
secret. Okay.
yeah, not until
Send me a sample.
Yeah, yeah, you
I'll
can be
mega
our lab rat, one of our lab rats. But so now that we've matured as an organization, we are taking a true biotech approach from the very beginning, running the experiments to determine which ingredients to consider, and then going into more and more advanced studies to further validate it before bringing the product to market. For this very first product, which we have been very fortunate that the approach we took has actually worked itself out based on the scientific studies we've been running, which we can talk about. But this was what we had access to was historical studies, human studies, animal studies, in vitro studies, and then looking at it mechanistically, looking at it in terms of evolutionary pathways, looking at it in humans. Does it have favorable effects? Does it have a reduced risk of mortality in humans, like an association? Like, for example, glucosamine is a substance that, although this is a observational study, it's not a placebo-controlled study, so it's not as powerful. But nonetheless, if you're looking at hundreds of thousands of people and the supplements they take, and then you see that far fewer people are dying of heart attacks and they're living longer average lifespans when they have glucosamine in their supplement routine, and then you also apply all of these other filters that I mentioned, there's reason to consider glucosamine in the formula now, right? We haven't finished yet with all of the criteria, but now there's a reason to consider glucosamine. So if you continue
Okay.
with the criteria, then are they nature based and found in the human biology but decline with age? For example, NMN, alpha ketoglucan, hyaluronic acid, glycine, and the levels decline with age? Or are they found in food or water supply? For example, trace doses of lithium have been found in our water supply throughout evolution, even in natural foods like wild salmon. And now we hardly have any lithium in our food and water supply. And there are multiple studies, I'm sure you're very aware of them, where they find people live longer lives, lower risk of Alzheimer's and neurocognitive decline, lower rates of depression, of suicide, of murder, of bipolar, schizophrenia, when people have higher rates of lithium in their water. But now with municipal water filtration and bottled water and pure water filters and so on, we're not getting it anymore. So that's another example. It's either something we've had in our food and water, or it's in our biology and it declines with age. They need to have a very low side effect profile such that it's such a low profile that it doesn't really even make a difference for the vast majority of people. They've ideally been used for decades or even centuria to millennia and have never had any specific significant side effects in humans. And they're considered safe by the FDA, EFSA, and other organizations. So those are the initial criteria we consider before we even look at an ingredient. Then when we look at the ingredients, we look at the different mechanisms, the different pathways. An example would be we don't want too many hormetic substances in our formula, because if you overdo the hormesis, it's no longer hormesis, right? We don't want to overdo mTOR or AMP kinase pathways, right? So we want to be cognizant of these different pathways and make sure that we aren't overdoing it. And part of it is an art along with the science. So bringing on the scientists who are experts on these molecules and these mechanisms of aging, and having 7 of them at your disposal to go back and forth with research studies and get their take on it, is how we eventually were able to arrive at the mix of ingredients we used and the dosages that we chose.
Interesting. Okay. So that's very helpful to understand how you come to get a supplement. But I still think that a big part of some of them, maybe not all of them, is the mechanistic approach that you're taking. Saying, okay, that this is, and that's what you mentioned before as well, that this is doing this mechanism.
100%. That's
And
the
I would
foundation
say,
approach. Yeah.
yeah,
But not the outcome that we measure to determine success.
so you're also doing clinical trials and to measure outcomes from the whole formula. I think that's a legitimate approach because you're also doing the clinical trials. Fisin is probably the biggest landmine where it's much more mechanistic, less clinical trials and all the other ingredients here. Maybe
Sure. In terms of
yeah.
the Yeah, in terms of the rationale, the initial rationale for inclusion, especially for its effect on senescent cells, yes. But then looking at the effects that it can have on cognition and inflammation in the lab with humans, placebo-controlled trials, I think, as I mentioned earlier, all of the ingredients, they had to have been studied in humans as well and found to be safe and found to have
Absolutely.
positive effects, especially in relation to longevity related parameters. That was adequate for its inclusion. The mechanisms of aging, I think it's important to consider how each of them connects to each other, right? If you have a mechanism of aging that's accelerated, you're going to then have a negative ripple effect on the other mechanisms as well. And these are the literal reasons why we do get older, right? The epigenome not essentially being expressed properly, your epigenome being expressed that of an older person, for example, can lead your cells to behave in a different way than they otherwise would. And so on and so forth. And that ripples across the different mechanisms. If you have excess DNA damage, excess inflammation can cause DNA damage. And then that DNA damage can lead to telomere shortening and it can lead to you needing to replace that cell. And so cellular senescence can take place. And then stem cells can get exhausted from all of the replacements, right? So these are all very real known mechanisms that have been studied very closely in relation to the aging process. And we've shown in studies that if you accelerate a mechanism, you accelerate the aging. That's how they get qualified as a mechanism of aging is they need to be shown that if you accelerate it, accelerate aging. And if you decelerate that mechanism or you have a favorable impact on that mechanism, you decelerate aging and the animals have a longer health span and lifespan. So those are two pretty high criteria, I think, not like some other mechanisms necessarily for you to consider something to be within the mechanisms of aging. And so I do think that it starts from a stronger position than other mechanisms once you're considered within those mechanisms of aging.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Let's go to glycine. Let's try to go down the list. So glycine's
Sure.
next. How much glycine do you have in the formula?
We have 1 gram in the
Okay.
formula. So this would be roughly the equivalent of having a serving of collagen protein. You can get more or less in that neighborhood of glycine. There are reasons why someone might want to take more glycine. You mentioned earlier that you take about 20 grams of it. I know Dr. Chris Masterjohn has done some thorough analysis of glycine years ago where he talked about different use cases for taking 5 grams, for example, or 10 grams. I think I've heard up to as high as 20, but that's definitely on the upper range. It can be for sleep, for example, for calmness, for mood, a number of different reasons. But yeah,
Yeah,
go
I'll
ahead.
just do why I take 20, just so you could see. I measure my glycine levels, and
Okay.
they've never been too high. Actually, they've been suboptimal levels, not low, but you want it to be in the higher end of the range. And they were in the lower end a few times for different reasons, but sometimes because fighting an infection or whatever. But what I found is that I need to take a lot of glycine in order to increase my levels, and it only stays in the blood for 3 hours, right? The half-life isn't so long. If you wanna keep it pretty elevated, pretty steady,
So,
there's,
so I have, I
yeah,
have I have a question for you. So when it comes to these blood labs, as blood labs don't show the full picture, they don't show the full truth. For example, you might have like very high levels of vitamin B12 and you look at that and you say, "Oh, I've got adequate vitamin B12. That's great. Like I don't need to worry about it." But maybe it's actually a cofactor that's preventing the B12 from being utilized or entering into the cell. And ultimately, you're not getting adequate B12 and you might exhibit the symptoms of inadequate B12. So,
right. But
well,
there's usually
so
multiple markers, let's say methylmalonic acid that I've also tested.
okay.
Oh,
So
yeah.
essentially my question is, what do you do to determine that simply because glycine levels are low or maybe B12 levels are very high to determine that it is actually that you need to get more of it or that maybe it looks low relative to the general population because your body is very utilizing that glycine more so than others are because you've optimized other processes such that you use more of it or with the B12 that you need other cofactors that you don't have, and that's why the levels are high in your blood, but you actually aren't reaping the benefits from the B12. Like how? Because those are complex, very complex questions going to like derivative functions beyond
I see
just
that
the actual.
sometimes.
Yeah,
I see that sometimes, whereas if you increase something, it will utilize something else
right.
and you'll have lower levels of that other thing, right? There's interactions in the body. I've seen that in my own blood test results where I'll do something and I'll see something else move.
Right.
So I do,
And in
I'm
that case, it might
testing.
not,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but in that case, the other thing might have gone lower. And by conventional standards, that's considered inadequate. You're too low. You need to supplement, let's say. But in your unique case, it might not actually be that you need to supplement. It might be that, all right, now you're utilizing it and you don't need to go higher with it. You're actually like at the perfect level at this point.
So I can't prove, it's a great question. I can't prove my answer, but I can tell you that there's been situations where I'm definitely utilizing a lot of stuff in the body more than normal people, whether it's because I'm exercising more, my brain is working harder, or whatever it is. Maybe I'm taking more vitamins and maybe
You
that's
got all the
utilizing things,
ingredients
right?
that
Like
the body needs. Yeah.
I'm taking, let's say I was taking more B6 and that's going to deplete my histidine levels. Okay. And what I find is people who exercise a lot, they're often depleted on arginine. I saw this in myself, saw it in Liver King, saw it in different people. And so I saw, for example, I'm low on histidine, low on arginine. And you don't want to be low on these things for longevity. So you could say, but maybe that's fine. Maybe you're just utilizing. I was actually low on vitamin C too, right? And that's one of the ingredients in your formula as well. I was low on vitamin C, even though I was taking 2 grams a day. Okay, that's
Mhm.
very unusual. And I was
Yeah.
doing it in a very smart way as well. So 500 milligrams 3 times a day, slow release formulas, not just 2 grams one shot. And I was taking 500 milligrams just randomly or like high vitamin C diet, whatever, right? So the daily value is 90 milligrams. So I'm getting like 20 times the RDA. My body is just utilizing vitamin C like no one's business. Anyway, I decide, okay, I'm instead of 2 grams, I'm going to take 6 grams. I actually then noticed a very significant physiological difference. And a lot of my biomarkers actually improved from that. You could be like, Chris Masterjohn says, you don't need more than 200 milligrams a day. Your body can't
Right.
even absorb it. And fact is, it's wrong. The fact is, I see in my biomarkers, in how I feel, that taking 6 grams is giving me a much better result than 2 grams a day. For whatever reason, I am burning through vitamin C. That's one example. So vitamin C, arginine, histidine. And I could show you, just so you see a few of them. You could see it visually for people who are watching. So arginine, you could see I was low in the beginning, right? Now it's not a coincidence that I'm high all the time, except when I was fighting infection. But even then, I started taking more. So I take 12 grams of citrulline a day, which increases arginine more than arginine itself. And then if we look at histidine, same thing. So low twice here. And now I'm not low ever. Just if I'm, maybe up my dosage actually because of this one here. But essentially I'm in a good histidine place now. Like I found the optimal dosage where I'm never low. You want to be on the higher end for longevity. And let's look at my vitamin C. So I actually didn't recheck since. Not the vitamin C. I rechecked other biomarkers which got improved. But you can see it's ridiculous that I'm taking a lot of vitamin C and I'm living very healthy and it's just why is my vitamin C low? And but the thing is that now that I started taking 6 grams, I actually feel significantly different. Like it feels, and then I looked at certain labs. I'm like, I see significant changes. These are just some examples. The answer to your question is if you're utilizing it more, you probably still need more of it. That's my guess for most of the things. I can't say it for everything. And
Right.
for glycine per se, I haven't noticed any negative effects from 20 grams a day. And as long and I don't yeah, I think like it is helping me keep my levels higher in the blood. It seems and when we look at animal studies, they're actually using the equivalent of like 80 grams a day or something. So I look at that big picture. I'll also look at what is glycine improving in my body? Where does it what are all the clinical trials and risks that it's related to? I'm looking at my lab markers in particular. I take a very broad view of each thing that I take in. But that's overall a great question, and I can't prove it, but that's my theory.
Makes sense. Okay.
Let Yeah.
Well, so specifically glycine, I think I misspoke earlier. I said 1 gram, it's 2 grams that we have in the
Okay.
formula.
And by the way, clinical trials will use 2 grams, and you will have a physiological effect. So I'm not trying to downplay the 2 grams of glycine. I think that it is having a physiological beneficial effect, especially since the clinical trials are using what, 2, 3 grams or something like that.
Typically 2 grams. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's good. I'm a big fan, and it's like you said, that 2 grams is gonna be equivalent to 10 grams of collagen, so it's a reasonable amount.
Yeah. Yeah. So why did we include it? One is for mitochondrial health on the mechanistic level. Another reason is that it can help to protect proteins from oxidative stress. Another is it can improve cognitive function, sleep quality, and so on, which are critical components of longevity is the lifestyle side, improving your sleep and recovery and so on. And also in lifespan extension. So longevity studies, it's been found to have favorable effects in multiple animal species. It specifically targets in terms of mechanistically, it targets loss of proteostasis, mitochondrial dysfunction, epigenetic alterations, altered intracellular communication, deregulated nutrient sensing, and cross-linking, which cross-linking is not technically a hallmark of aging, but might as well be considered one.
Okay, awesome. Is hyaluronic acid good for longevity, or is that just good for
Good,
skin? What do you have
good
it in there
question.
for?
Yeah, good question. So we included it for two reasons. The main reason we included it was because of a molecule that is contained within hyaluronic acid, which is acetylglucosamine. Acetylglucosamine is distinct from glucosamine. So it's not the same as glucosamine sulfate or glucosamine chondroitin. It's it's a distinct molecule. And
Is that the same as
acetylglucosamine,
N-acetylglucosamine?
I believe so. I believe it would be the same.
Okay.
Acetylglucosamine can help to reduce protein accumulation. So this would be the mechanism of loss of proteostasis. It's been shown in animal studies to be able to extend lifespan. But then to your earlier point, it also is shown to have favorable effects on skin health. And when we were creating the formula, we were cognizant of compliance and needing people to take our product for a long time. So, in order for anyone to be convinced to spend money and take something regularly, they need to see short term improvements. There are multiple different ingredients we included for many different reasons. But one of the goals was to improve skin health. And so I mentioned how fisetin can help that earlier. Hyaluronic acid, which starts to decline right around 20 years old. That's what helps to hydrate the skin, the joints, it
I have
lubricates and so on.
Yeah, I have
That's
2
one of the
questions on
reasons.
hyaluronic
Yeah,
acid, and I wonder if you know the answer. One is, I've been trying to find so there's 2 types of hyaluronic acid. One is low molecular weight, one is high molecular weight,
sure.
and I think the low one is more inflammatory. I Was it the
Yep.
high molecular weight that was more inflammatory?
The low molecular weight. In fact, there's
Is
actually
more
three forms.
Okay,
There's low, there's more than three really. If you actually speak with professionals in the field, they'll say that you've got like very low molecular weight, mid molecular weight,
okay.
high molecular
And which
weight.
one is
Yeah.
anti-inflammatory?
The mid molecular weight is the ideal. The inflammatory form is the low molecular weight. It's so
Okay.
small, it can actually end up causing like gut inflammation, for example, if you ingest it, or if you put it topically, it can also cause redness and irritation.
So what I'm trying to understand is when I buy a hyaluronic acid supplement, at what form am I getting? They don't tell you.
They don't. We intentionally, we use mid molecular weight hyaluronic acid, which is between 1,000 and 1,800 kilodaltons, which it's more easily broken down in the gut than high molecular weight. So that's ideal because you want to absorb it, but it's also not inflammatory like the low molecular weights. And then very low molecular weight, which I mentioned earlier, that would be defined as less than 400 kilodaltons. So 400 to 1000 is approximately low molecular weight. We're at 1000 to 1800, which is mid molecular weight, but above 1800 is high molecular weight.
And so that's good that you guys have that intermediate molecular weight. What about a random like company that's
They are
what
going to, if I had to bet, they're going to give you the cheapest one they can find. And the cheapest one is going to be a high molecular weight.
the high
So it's not
molecular
going to be
weight, and
adequately absorbed.
so it won't be inflammatory, but it won't be adequately it won't be absorbed.
Yeah, that would be my guess because generally speaking, the lower the molecular weight, the more expensive it is to produce.
Oh,
It's
they're
like
not gonna produce
micronizing creatine, right? Like it's an
Yeah,
extra
yeah.
process to make it smaller.
Okay, got
So
it.
no business in their right mind is going to give you the more expensive product without showing off that it's the low molecular weight
Right.
ones. I've also worked with vendors and gone to conferences and so on. So a lot of this stuff is
Right.
not stuff that you can easily look up on the internet. You need to
You
like
can't
meet with
easily
people and
Google it.
socialize it. Yeah.
I tried. I'm like, ChatGPT, come on, give me something there. Nothing. 0. Okay, so that's very interesting. So I take that as well. Let's see what else, what other ingredients. How much vitamin C do you put in?
I believe off the top of my head, it's 100 milligrams. The main
Okay.
reason that we included it is for its synergistic effect with the calcium alpha ketoglutarate. So it's not specifically for, although it can have favorable effects on the epigenome from a mechanistic perspective, it's predominantly for its synergistic effect with CAKG.
Okay, let's talk about CAAKG, calcium alpha ketoglutarate. I've had a lot of experience with this one.
Okay.
How much do you put in?
We put in 1.1 grams.
Okay. I was mega dosing 10 grams to 15 grams a day.
Oh, wow.
Well,
That's
not
definitely a
of
megadose.
that was on the AKG. The
Okay.
CAAKG was less. So it's a little different. It's more concentrated, the CAAKG, because you have more alpha ketoglutarate. But still was taking a lot. I was taking 10 to 15 grams a day, and it increased my glutamate like crazy. Like I got so much anxiety from it
Yeah.
at 15 grams a day because it increases glutamate
Yeah, at those dosages,
at
definitely.
those dosages. Yeah. Now I take 1 gram a day and I don't notice anything.
Yeah, that's the ideal
Yeah.
dosage. When it comes to longevity, I'd suggest you consider the calcium form over the arginine form. So,
Let's talk
um,
about that. Why
sure.
is that?
So, Dr. Brian Kennedy at National University of Singapore, he's at the longevity lab there. He's one of the biggest names in the longevity field. So, just for a quick context, a lot of people are familiar with Dr. David Sinclair at Harvard. He made resveratrol and NMN very popular. But David Sinclair is the most like public facing of the scientists. But Matt Kaberlein, who's one of our advisors, and Brian Kennedy were lab mates with David Sinclair. So the three of them were at MIT together under Dr. Leonard Garante's lab. So anyway, they are like considered amongst the top longevity researchers in the world. And so Brian Kennedy at National University of Singapore did most of the research related to alpha ketoglutarate, and he tried the different forms of it. And he found that the calcium form had the best effect on the longevity of the mice that he was studying. They eventually did human clinical studies as well. But why is that the case? The theory, we don't know for certain, but the theory is that the calcium slows the absorption more. And it's harder to break down the calcium, separate it from the AKG. And it's like a stronger molecular bond. And so it just leads to a more tapered dose, if you will. The pharmacokinetics of it slows down the absorption. And in theory, that's at least one of the theories for why the CA may have had more pronounced effects on lifespan than the AKG. That was done in a mouse study. Now, he's done human studies as well, but I don't know if he specifically compared like AKG, arginine version versus calcium version in humans. So, they have the researchers limited budgets. So they're going to perhaps test it out in mice, which one extends lifespan more, and then use that to decide the form that they're going to use in humans. And that's what I believe is the case, but I don't know for certain if he did it in humans.
If that's the case, why you could also get that effect by, let's say, taking a smaller dosage throughout the day, theoretically, right?
You can. And to that point, I personally, for my product Novos Core, take a half a sachet with lunch and a half a sachet with dinner. And I spread it out
Okay.
specifically for the CAKG. But nonetheless, even doing that, I still do see it as ideal to follow the research. And the research found that
Yeah,
the calcium form extended mouse lifespans
I would
superior
agree with
to
that.
other forms.
My only issue with calcium is I like taking as many supplements as I can in powder form. And because I take 160 supplements a day, I have to try to take as many. I want to take as many as I can in the powder, and they don't really sell calcium AKG in powder form.
We do. Try Novos
Right.
Core. Novos Core is powder. It's a powder drink mix. We have an unflavored
Okay,
version. So there's no sweetener and flavors. And it would taste odd in water, but if you put it in a smoothie or a juice, you won't taste it. And then the orange flavor is stevia sweetened.
that's great. All right. Let's see what other ingredients I'm particularly interested in. Oh, malate is an interesting one. It's something that I'm on and off about. I've taken it sometimes, not taken it. Is there even an animal study showing that it increases longevity, or it's like mainly worms?
Yeah, it is. The studies that have shown extension in lifespan, as far as I can recall, are for some of the more simple organisms.
Yeah,
But malate has, for example, it can improve energy production through the mitochondria. It can improve antioxidant defenses. So it helps in the production of superoxide dismutase, for example. In human studies, it has been shown to improve energy. And then the form that we use is magnesium malate, and the abundance of health benefits of magnesium. I'm sure you're supplementing with it in one form or
I
another.
am
The
absolutely.
majority of people are deficient in it. So it's like a 1-2 punch. By including magnesium malate, we're getting the potential lifespan extending effects of malate as shown in simpler organisms, but then also favorably impacting a few of the mechanisms of aging, specifically mitochondrial dysfunction, genomic instability, altered intercellular communication, telomere shortening, and deregulated nutrient sensing.
Okay, interesting. What have you
I,
noticed in terms of you take a supplement and you notice a very clear difference in a blood biomarker or a specific test? Let's say you said your rate of aging went down a lot, your biological age. What can you pinpoint that, hey, I did this and nobody could be 100% sure, but you're like, I'm like 98% sure that this had a big impact on this marker. Like right after I did this, it got way better. How many of those things can you pinpoint?
so first is like our products. And so we have three products: Novos Core, Boost, and Vital. This is before we launched Novos Vital, specifically Core and Boost. I've seen it myself, but then also many other people who have tested before and after significant reductions in epigenetic biological pace of aging as measured by the Dunedin pace clock, but then other algorithms as well. So for example, we did a case study with participants half male, half female, age 39 to 77. And we found that 3/4 of them slowed their epigenetic pace of aging by a statistically significant margin beyond the error margin of the test. And it was on average 1 month per year of slower aging. And then the
Okay.
1/4 that did not slow down, they did not speed up either. And as you would expect, there should have been some people that sped up in that group. So we expect that's probably some sort of protective effects for people that may have lived less than healthy lives during that 6 month span.
Right.
I personally have noticed, and I have this on my website, slowmyage.com. I've got all of these different epigenetic tests. I've got a metabolomic tests, proteomic, different physiological markers, and so on, that I've really been able to optimize that since having been taking my own formulations. Now, when it comes to
So you
other
wouldn't
things
know which
outside of my
specific things in the formula are really causing all these different changes per se?
We don't know specifically, though what I can say is that like in scientific studies that we've run, most of these are in vitro studies. We found that we have synergistic properties for the combination of our ingredients. And so I would I would owe a lot of it to the actual synergies as opposed to any one single individual ingredient. And that's part of how we're getting our patents is because these are novel, unexpected effects. They were non-obvious effects by combining these ingredients that we would have such a dramatic impact on oxytosis, ferroptosis, or cellular inflammation, or
Okay.
cellular senescence, and so on.
What's your
So
rate of
something that
aging, for example, in
my
this
rate of
Dunedin
aging,
pace?
my rate of aging is below zero point 0.7. It's 0.69. And
Okay.
then if you look at my biological age from different tests like Grim age, Horvath test, and so on, and then we can also do the principal component analysis versions of these for stronger statistical significance. They average out to greater than 31% reduction. So although they're not measuring the pace, if you just like the implication of it is that throughout my life, the pace has been greater than 31% slower
Right.
aging.
And
And
did
then
you
I've
measure it,
replicated
for
this with,
yourself before and after? Have you tried to stop the protocol and see what happened or no?
so I have very hesitant, like when something's working really well, it's
I'm the
really
same way,
tough to
I
get
know.
me to stop taking all of everything and just go cold turkey, no supplements, no Novos, nothing, and then test again. That would be the best way for me to do it. But It's like exercise. If someone said stop exercising for a month, like no way in hell. Like I've been exercising since I was 12 years old. So
Yeah, with me, there's a lot of natural variation. So sometimes I'll specifically just not include a supplement in my regimen, just see what happens. And then I'll take lab testing and I'll just see what happens. So I'm like learning new things all the time, either by doing megadosing or just doing these types of on and off experiments.
yeah, two things that I noticed I had benefits from. One is taurine. After the longevity study was published last year, I started taking about 3 grams of taurine a day, and I noticed that my caloric output went up significantly, probably about 7, 8, 9% on average per day. So I was just being much more physically active without even knowing it. And it has persisted for nearly a year. And there was a period where I ran out of
Incredible.
stock and I actually started to reduce my activity levels. And so that was really interesting for me. Another one is when it comes to my physical performance. So I set a goal for myself when I turned 40 to run my fastest mile of my life. And I haven't quite hit it yet, but I'm within 6 seconds. And that personal record was when I was 20. So I'm basically double the age and I'm hitting within six
What
seconds.
is
It's like a
your
margin of error. So
what's your pace?
I'm doing like 6:36 right now. Sorry,
That's pretty damn
five
good.
minutes and 36 seconds.
Oh,
And
that's
my
incredible.
fastest was 5 minutes and 30 seconds outside. On the treadmill, it was 4:56, but the treadmill doesn't really
What's your
count.
VO2 max?
Right now, it's in the, let me check it. I believe it's in the upper 60s.
Is that on a legit machine or like an Apple Watch?
No, this is based on the Apple Watch. I've done the legit machine, but I haven't done it for a while.
Yeah, it's the
So,
60s is very good. That's very good. Are you doing
um,
cardio every day?
sorry, it's the lower 60s, not upper 60s. I'm doing
Still very good.
cardio. I haven't been doing it as much recently because my Achilles has been bothering me, but I'm trying to run at least 3 days per week and then I'll bicycle once a week. And so I'm getting at least four like intense sessions in. And then those other days might be like a light jog or just a long walk.
Interesting.
And then I weight lift on the other days. But what
What do you
was going to say in
Yeah.
terms of what really I know this has improved my performance is lecithin, which has phosphatidylcholine in it, and choline can help with
How
acetylcholine
much you
and
take?
muscle function. But I'm typically taking about a full scoop is probably the equivalent of 1.5 tablespoons of lecithin. Plus, I take
So at least
trimethylglycine in
10
the morning.
grams.
Yeah, probably in that neighborhood. So I'm
Yeah.
about probably in that 10-gram range for the lecithin. I'll just have it in a drink at night. It actually, I find it helps me sleep better. For some people, it energizes them. For me, it helps me
Interesting.
sleep.
What do
And
you
the
feel
nice thing
from
about
it?
lecithin is that it also has phosphatidylinositol and serine in it as well. So you're
Right.
getting all of these phospholipids, and it goes beyond just the neurotransmitters, but also the cell walls and the
What
nerves.
do
And
you
so
feel
I feel so it's interesting. I think that if I take it during the day, for some reason, it makes me a little bit groggy. But when I take it at night, I sleep very well. So I think I'm getting more restorative sleep in the first place. I think that
Interesting.
probably my cognition in terms of like just memory and word recall improves. I don't know how much of that is from better sleep versus it being the actual lecithin. And then, like I
Okay.
said, my athletic performance, like my running, I noticed that I can push myself harder in terms of my speed or my distance when I'm having the lecithin, which then translates into eventually seeing as a secondary effect my VO2 max improving or actually declining when I stop taking the lecithin.
And you're pretty confident that it's from that?
I'm pretty confident. I'm never 100% sure because there's
Right.
always confounding factors. Even what I said
Absolutely.
about taurine, I put it at about 90% odds, it being the taurine,
Right.
but there
Okay.
might be some other unknown variable that's causing it.
No, that's always the case. That's what I'm taking that with a grain of salt, but I like to hear these kinds of stories.
Yeah. The
Like
anecdotes.
the anecdote yeah, if the anecdotes are done if somebody's just, "Yeah, I tried this thing," and they're not, like, really skeptical, then they're just like, "Yeah, I think it helps, whatever." But I
Yeah.
think if you tried a lot of stuff and you're like, "You know what? I from these 2 things, I think I really noticed," that's much more significant for me.
Yeah. And other things, for example, astaxanthin. I noticed my skin, I live in Florida now and my skin doesn't get inflamed from the sun. Not that I'm like spending a ton of time in the sun, but skin health seems better. And then I've also used one of those devices at a conference that measures your skin carotenoid levels. It uses light to
Okay.
measure it. I posted about this on my blog, Slow My Age. It's one of the more recent posts. But my levels were in the upper percentiles, like one out of every, I don't know, it might have been the 99th percentile or something. So I have high levels of skin carotenoids, and that's going to protect you from like solar radiation.
Absolutely.
And so that's another thing. Like I eat a healthy diet with a lot of vegetables, which probably, and fruits, which probably contributes as well. But I have a feeling that the astaxanthin is also contributing significantly to that.
How much you take a day?
4 milligrams. Those are the dosages that they recommend, I think, mainly for like athletic performance. But like I was taking it mainly for the sake of skin health. And there is
Right.
research that shows from ITP, the interventional testing program, I believe found that astaxanthin extended mouse lifespan. And they do the study in
It
multiple labs
did.
across the country and replicated it.
Yeah, it did. It did. That's why I take it really actually. But the thing is that I think that if you actually do an equivalence of the dosage, it's much higher than 12 milligrams.
One
Yeah.
thing to consider is that like when they do these mouse studies, they give the mice like this standard chow that's not particularly good for you and or it's not like replete with antioxidants and carotenoids and so on. Even though the dosage equivalents, like allometrically scaled for humans, might be much higher. Also consider that if you're eating fruits and vegetables and you're taking a multi and you're getting vitamin E and all tocopherols and tocotrienols, like the combination of all of that together might actually put you at a better place
Are
when
you
compared to the mouse.
absolutely. Are you a fan of tocotrienols? Like supplementation?
Always prefer to try to get it when I can through food, but if you're going to do if you're gonna do a vitamin E, like not a standard vitamin E, you need to do the tocotrienols and the tocopherols, like the full spectrum of it. Otherwise, there's studies that have found like shortened lifespan from just taking plain old vitamin C.
Okay, so there's one more thing, an interesting thing to discuss. COQ10 and NAC. I take them both. Yeah, I know you don't like them. So
Yeah.
tell me, I mean, you don't like them because they're antioxidants and you don't think they're going to increase lifespan.
Yeah. So right. So for us to endorse an ingredient and consider it positive for longevity, it needs to have a positive effect on longevity. And or we group it in a different category. For example, there's general health supplements, and like most of
Mm,
your vitamins and minerals would be considered general health supplements. So if you have any inadequacies in them, you're going to have some sort of like short to midterm health issue. So they're still very important. But for longevity, we're talking specifically about going above and beyond and slowing down the aging process and extending health span and lifespan beyond what you
right.
ordinarily would.
But let's say NAC, for example. I think a lot longevity up till 100 is going to be preventing disease. And NAC, I'll tell you why I take NAC. Given my framework, it so number one is there's a lot of clinical trials on it that it helps with a whole bunch of different things. I've noticed very significant effects in some clients, in myself. So I feel better on it. And then my labs actually improve on it. If I look at, let's do that. Let's use my approach. I have 27 DNA risks that it's helping with, right? 2 symptoms and conditions, 5 goals, and 10 lab risks. So when you look at all these things, you see quite a compelling story. Now, your thing is it's an antioxidant. It's not necessarily going to increase lifespan in, but like the way I'm looking at it, I'm seeing, hey, look, I notice this helps me. I see all
Sure.
these DNA risks, all these clinical trials that are being done, that have been done, and these 10 lab markers that it's moved in the right direction.
Yeah.
I look at the big picture and I say this is a compelling case for health span. I don't know if I'm gonna. I think it could help me live longer in the sense that I could prevent disease up to the age of 100. I don't know if it's gonna increase. It's not gonna allow me to live to 120 per se. So maybe it's not good in every respect, but I'm curious the way I see it, my framework of how I process the information, I see, hey, this is a compelling supplement.
Mhm.
But then I see somebody like you, you're like, the mechanisms, it's an antioxidant, it's not necessarily, maybe these organisms don't live longer on it. What's your take there?
Yeah. So first, just the context of antioxidants. There was the free radical theory of aging back in the I think 70s. It began 1980s, where scientists at the time believed that aging was caused by oxidative damage and DNA damage. And that's the whole reason why we age. And we've since realized that is just one of the 12 mechanisms of aging. There's a lot more to the story of aging than just that. We've also come to realize that antioxidants are not always a good thing. In other words, inflammation and oxidative stress is actually a signal to the body to then, for example, hormetically come back stronger. So you create oxidative stress when you exercise. And if you take vitamin C and vitamin E after you exercise, you counteract those free radicals and your body does not come back as strong. Studies have actually shown that you counteract some of the effects of your exercise by taking C and E post workout. So that's just to make the point that antioxidants are not a simple story of like always good. There are cases where it could actually have a negative effect for your intended goal. Specifically for NAC, when it comes to longevity, there's mixed results. There are some studies that have shown in simple organisms that it might be able to extend lifespan. But in some other studies, including in mice, it shows that it can potentially shorten lifespan. So I think it's one of those ambiguous cases where we don't know for certain whether it's going to help or hinder. NAC also can increase the metastasis of cancer. So hopefully none of us have cancer. And so for most of us, it doesn't make a difference. Just so, for context, certain B vitamins can increase the metastasis of cancer as well. Once you have cancer, you need to treat your health completely differently when you don't.
Absolutely.
Because when you don't have it, you want to avoid it. And the ingredients that can help you avoid it might actually help to feed or fuel or protect the cancer once you do have it. So there's some complexity there as well. I think, and then when it comes to longevity studies, there was a recent study that found that combining NAC with glycine can lead to higher glutathione levels, and glutathione is associated with better health, especially because the levels of this antioxidant decline as we age. And this is an endogenous antioxidant, which is quite powerful compared to the oral forms of antioxidants, the exogenous forms. So I would say that I personally have mixed feelings about NAC. We have it on our website as an ingredient that we explain as to why we did not include it in the formula. And I explained most of that just now. I wouldn't completely rule it out and say I wouldn't be convinced or willing to be convinced by experimental evidence that it could be good for longevity. But I don't think that there's adequate evidence to conclude that it is good for longevity just yet for these reasons. And if you personally find all of these benefits from it and you're doing this very thorough testing, which the vast majority of people are not doing, then I think you can feel more confidence going in with it than, say, the average person should.
Yeah. So I hear what you're saying. I think as a longevity molecule, I guess if you're just very focused on that, then yeah, it's not clear that it's a longevity molecule. But for me, it's more of a health span type of molecule. And like it does help me get my lab markers in the optimal range. For example, GGT, lactate dehydrogenase, homocysteine, mercury. So
Mhm.
homocysteine, for example, yeah, it's not just an antioxidant. Also, for example, let's say it's not. It actually breaks down homocysteine, irrelevant of the antioxidant status. So I think it does certain things that are not just antioxidant, like it brings down glutamate, for example. That's not based on the antioxidant mechanism. It's based on, and we know that higher glutamic acid in the blood is not good for longevity. What it does is it takes glutamate plus cysteine plus glycine and it creates glutathione. So it sucks up the glutamate. It's one of the best ways to decrease glutamate. I'll use that for protocol for people who I think have high glutamate. What I'm saying, the idea is that there's actually many mechanisms to NAC which are independent of its antioxidant status, and it's not functioning as a typical antioxidant in the way that something like vitamin E may function or beta carotene or something like
Sure.
that. So I think each antioxidant astaxanthin is also an antioxidant, by the way, right? And we see that
And
has
they all
longevity
behave very
benefits.
differently. Some
They all behave
antioxidants are
differently.
hormetic, right? Some of them are actually
Yep,
pro-oxidant, and then your body upregulates its defenses and you have higher levels of
correct,
glutathione or superoxide dismutase as a result.
correct. And I would say this there's a similar thing with COQ10. I'm not sure you're going to live longer, but there was one study that really, like, for people who took COQ10. their risk of having heart disease just went down dramatically. It was it's, like, really good in certain ways, and even after they stopped taking it for a long time, their risk was still lower. So that was a compelling study. There's other information too that I didn't notice as much that it's helping my biomarkers, but meaning it helped some, but not hard to say exactly. But yeah, I think the takeaway from the conversation, and you helped me better understand your position, is that if something is not necessarily good as a longevity molecule, it doesn't necessarily mean it won't help improve health span.
Right. Health span or specific short term health
Or
markers. And
yeah,
so something that I always want to make sure I clearly distinguish with people is that there are different supplements out there that can have different short term effects. For example, you might take something for weight loss or for muscle building or for libido or for focus, a nootropic, and so on. And they might lead you to that specific goal in the short term. But the question, is it good for you in the long term? And that's where there's a big question mark for a lot of these different interventions. Just because
absolutely.
you feel better or you achieve the short term result doesn't mean it's actually good for you to stay on that substance for 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, right? And so we are very careful about choosing ingredients that we have a very high degree of certainty. We're never absolutely positive. That's just the nature of biology. But we have a lot of evidence and are very confident that this is going to be good for you in the long term to extend both health span and lifespan with practically no side effects as a result.
Yeah, I appreciate the conversation. I learned a few good nuggets in the conversation. And
Like
yeah, it looks like you have a good formula and some, yes. So people should go check them out.
I think it's also
Yeah,
good
go.
for people who are like in between. So like find myself in between. I do take individual pills as well, but I do that this simplifies it. So it's not nearly as much trouble for me to like individually measure everything. So we validated our product scientifically. We continue to validate it scientifically so I can feel confident in the product and I can look at my own biomarkers and so on. And then there are other things like I take creatine, I take astaxanthin, as I mentioned, I take a multivitamin, the pure encapsulations one multivitamin, and so on. So I do take other pills, but instead of having an additional dozen pills, it's just one
Right.
drink powder in a single
Absolutely.
sachet that I can simplify
Yeah.
with.
That's definitely a simplification. How many supplements, individual ingredients you take a day?
So if you consider Novos Core, Novos Vital, and Novos Boost is two tiny pills, that's NMN. Novos Vital has 7 ingredients in these daily chews. And then Novos Core is 12. So that's already the equivalent of like 25 pills that we're simplifying into just 2 pills and a couple of enjoyable experiences. And then other things, I would approximate probably a total of like a dozen pills combined. So it's probably at 30. Like if
37.
they were all pills, probably in the
Right, right.
neighborhood of around 40 pills. But since they're
40.
not, we're down
40
to
like
like a dozen.
separating. I guess the question is how many separate ingredients in a proper dosage? Meaning, like, if you take 5 milligrams of pterostilbene, that's not going to be a proper dosage, right? You take 50, you're in the proper dosage range, right? So, how many? But it seems like all the ingredients in the Novos are
We're
in,
proper
dosage
dosage. I
where
mean,
you would get
we
them as if you were to buy individual supplements.
we give the optimal dosage. We're not like a lot
Right.
of companies that just try to list an ingredient to say we have it. We give you what the science has shown as being the optimal dosage. So that's 20 ingredients between our 3 products. And then the other things that I take on my own is probably, again, like probably another, I don't know, dozen to 15. Because then like when I think of my smoothies, like I'll put a scoop of mushrooms in it. I'll put some
Right. Then you add
spirulina and
some things here and
chlorella.
there. Right.
Depends on
Okay.
how you define ingredient, but yeah.
Okay. And are you consistent with these every day or you take breaks?
I'm quite consistent. There have been times where when I'm traveling, I force myself to take a break just to see if there's any changes in how I feel. And also to make sure that if I am overdoing something that I know, like I could give my body the time to eliminate it. So I'll do that, but that's maybe like a week here and there, like every quarter or something like that. It's not super frequent.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. Okay. All right. Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, I appreciate you coming on. And where can people find you, your website, or where can they
Sure.
find you?
novoslabs.com. We're also on all of the social networks as Novos. We also have a free mobile app called Novos Life on Android and iOS that includes a free biological age test, free lifestyle assessment, and personalized recommendations for what you can do to slow down your aging without purchasing anything. And then a ChatGPT like chatbot built in that's trained on how you answer the questions. And soon will also include your wearables like Aura and Whoop and Apple Watch and so on. And then I personally have slowmyage.com. I'm on TikTok, X, and Instagram as Slow My Age. And also I just wanted to thank you that as I mentioned before the interview that I've been following your work for probably about a decade now. And I've always been a fan of what you've been putting together. So I appreciate what you put out there. And so much of the information you share is publicly available. And I know I've made a number of decisions based on the research that you've published on your website. I've always appreciated it being there. And it's nice to finally meet you.
Yeah, that's likewise. Nice to meet you. And by the way, just something interesting you said about the AI chatbot. So, what is that based on? Like, what kind of information is it based on? The wearable data that they inputted?
So we've trained it with, so we've got more than 250 scientifically referenced articles on our website. So that's the foundation for the training. Then we have a number of customer support questions that get somewhat technical that we've added into the mix as well. And then there are some scientific papers that we've written a synopsis of and included as well. And then that combined with people's survey responses and their wearable data gives them a very longevity specific perspective on health. So we're not in there trying like if someone was focused on bodybuilding, it's going to be a completely different experience in LLM and so on than what we are. We're focused
Right.
specifically on longevity and we trained it in that way for people that have that their eye on lifespan and health span.
Looks like you got a lot of cool products here.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, let us know and we'll get some product over to you.
All right. Awesome. It was great talking.
All right. You too. Thanks, Joe.
67% of listeners aren't subscribed to the show, so please don't forget to show your support by hitting the subscribe button now. You'll not only be supporting the show, but also investing in yourself and your health journey, all while helping to keep us ad free.